Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this COVID legal compliance session run by Kaizen Synergy Law Firm. My name is Nihal Samara. I'm the General Counsel and Legal Director here at Kaizen Synergy, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. Today's session is part one of a number of webinars, legal compliance webinars that we are going to be running over the next couple of months. We are going to be running these sessions weekly to keep you up to date about specific changes in COVID rules, requirements that your agency needs to follow, and what your obligations are from an agency point of view as well too. We have been running these webinars since 2020, and they are all available on our YouTube videos as well too, and resources will also be made available to all attendees joining us today. As always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being recorded, we do pay our respects to the elders past and present for where we all are being joined from this webinar today. So let's have a look at the current state. It is starting to be 2022, an increasingly complicated year already, and we're only a few days into the year. As of today, there's been announcement of a new variant, possibly a new variant called Deltacron that's being announced and discovered in some parts of Europe and the likes, and we're seeing Omicron being a major concern across the country as well too. What we are finding though is with a number of agencies that are joining us today, we have reached out to actually ask questions on, well, what did you want out of the webinar, but also what are some of the challenges that your agencies are facing? And quite simply, there has been an overwhelming statements from agencies simply saying, look, there's confusion with department guidance. It's not as forthcoming as what has been seen over the past year or so. So what do we actually need to look at and actually do? So today's agenda is going to focus on some of the constant changing rules. We are going to be looking at providing sound bites. And when I say this, sound bites to all of you each week around this. We are going to be running these webinars, as I've mentioned, over the next few months, and every week on the Tuesday at 10 o'clock Australian Daylight Saving Time, we'll be running these sessions. That said, all of these sessions are recorded as well too, and also the webinar information, including any reference documents and slides, will also be made available to all attendees as well. The other part that agencies have asked us is, what do we actually need to do? And what is actually working for other agencies exactly like yourselves? So what we're going to focus on today is looking at some of the overarching rules that your agency should be following. We're going to be unpacking these as we go through over the next few weeks, and focusing on key topics that your agency needs to consider. Of course, if you do have any questions after the webinars or the likes leading into the following week's session, you can reach out to us and we will look at including this information in the subsequent sessions that we'll also run as well too. So let's have a look at, by attending this webinar, what is some of the things that you should be getting? Well, essentially, you should be getting a timely set of resources that your agency can use, including providing services to clients that you support as well too. You'll also see what are some of the COVID safe systems that other agencies like yourselves have also been using, and we'll look at a number of different case examples of what has worked and what continues to work. And this has been one of the key areas that we've found has been incredibly useful for other agencies that have attended these webinars to see firsthand what is actually working for other agencies. It is really quite confusing when at first you sort of look at parts of this, looking at the legal section, then you find some other documents in some other website, and then the news will say something else. But at the end of the day, agencies are saying, look, what is actually working for us, and how can we help our personnel in continuing to provide services to our clients? How can we protect our clients and what happens also if we do get a positive case of COVID? What do we do? And these are really some of the things that we're going to cover off today as well too. Now, a few housekeeping items, as I've mentioned, is that this webinar is being recorded all the way up to the question and answer part of the session. You can use the chat group to post any questions as we are going through today's session. This session is being recorded, as I've mentioned, and is published on our Gemba 360 YouTube channel. And all materials we're using, including these slides, will be circulated after today's webinar. You will also get access to the Gemba's dashboard as well too, which I will show you and agencies can use. This is a single seat that is license free that allows you to jump in and access the resources. If obviously you did want to open this up to your agency, then there is a subscription fee that is payable around this, and it is on a month-to-month arrangement or yearly if you like as well. But it opens up all the resources that you can access, and we will show these to you as well too. So that said, what I just wanted to show you was a couple of things. Firstly, as well, you will find that our resources, you can access it via our website as well, and also view other agencies and the likes of resources and information. Also, as I mentioned, on our Gemba 360 YouTube channel, you can watch all of the past videos that we have run, and we will publish these from week to week on this on YouTube as well. Equally, you will also get access to the Gemba Dashboard, which allows you to look at the resources, and we'll show you what agencies are using in terms of COVID safe forms, policy templates that are on here, HR vaccination registers, and the likes for your agency to use. And these are also updated as the law changes. So it does give you legal compliance feeds that are specific to your agency. So each of you will get access to this dashboard, as I mentioned, to start off with a single seat, which opens it up to give you access to some of these resources that we're talking about today. And it will also give you your legal compliance updates live from Parliament as the law changes for you to be across as well. So with it, one of the areas that we're going to look at is around the COVID safe plans. This goes back to when we initially had the 3-step plans in terms of what the federal and state governments have been looking at. This has now been, I'll say, morphed into the national plan to transition to a national COVID response, and each of the states have their own roadmaps, which we will be unpacking over the next few weeks. Now, when we talk of legal compliance, and this does confuse a lot of agencies. So I'm just going to walk through very briefly how we've actually set up these summary of these rules, where we've pulled this information from for your agency. And so that way you can know what the structure of our legal updates are and where we can make some general information on the rules itself. So first of all, when we've looked at legal compliance and the COVID safe rules, we've pulled information from, first of all, looking at a compliance framework, which is the big balloons, looking at self-assessments, so taking some of the laws and changing them into checklists, some simple and easy checklists that your staff or personnel can use, and also allows you to monitor some of your clients as well too, and also get alerts on information that you also need. These are self-assessments, also will include things like cleaning forms and cleaning checklists as well too for your agency, and other documentations that you need to have within your agency as well. And this will also include policies that your agencies use. So essentially what we've done here for agencies, and this is going back even before COVID, was to essentially look at what legislation is out there. And essentially, rather than drifting into, I'll call it the politics of whether COVID is real or not, we're here just to look at the legislation, the laws, and policy directives coming out of the federal government to start with, and then each of the state or territory governments after that. So essentially, we've looked at things like the biosecurity legislation at the federal level, and on the top left-hand corner, we've looked at each of the pandemic legislation at the state level, whether you're based in Victoria, WA, Queensland, South Australia, Northern Territory, etc., Tasmania, and then looked at, well, what are the policy directives that have come out of this? So this includes things like the work health and safety requirements, privacy obligations and fair work obligations, and then also the regulatory departments such as things like safe work and the relevant state COVID plans as well. What this has given us is a series of self-assessments that your agency can use. And a lot of the time agencies will ask us around, well, we want to have a policy on mandatory vaccination, but we can't actually find where is the information that we need to have this in place, or should we be doing it in the first place? And one of the big areas that we focused on is around work health and safety. So while the public health directives is one part of it, each of your agencies has an obligation to ensure that you meet your work health and safety obligations by minimizing COVID within the workplace, and also for your staff or personnel, and also for your clients as well. Once this has happened, and once you've seen this, it then looks at, well, how do you actually manage all of this information that you need to have within your agency? So essentially, what we have seen being provided is that essentially there are a number of Commonwealth directions that have been issued a number of years ago and still is relevant today. So at a high level, in terms of where we're sitting, essentially the employers you should be having policies, procedures to support employees working from home if possible. And we're seeing this now with some agencies that as Omicron and the spread of the virus has increased exponentially in some parts of in some local government areas, not just within the state areas. We've seen some agencies that we've even spoken today, one of which being the Southern Migrant Resource Centre, where they've actually, I'm going to say, pushed staff back to working from home until the 5th of, until early February, around the 5th of February. So essentially, even these guidelines that were actually issued a couple of some time ago by the Commonwealth Department are still relevant here. It also means things like social distancing is in place. They talk of, at this stage, 4 square meters, but this is and 1.5 meters between people, discouraging carpooling, promoting hygiene, undertaking frequent cleaning, holding essential meetings only by video conference where possible, modifying your roster, avoiding non-essential travel, and essentially training and educating staff. So these are about 14 different criteria that your agency should be focusing on. What we do have, which I will add, is in your resource pack that we will send you, a series of policies that you have access to. So as I'm going through, I will just show you that you do have access to these resources, or you will get access to these resources after today's session. Once you do log in, you can go into the Gemba Doc section and essentially click on the COVID policies, and you can find a whole range of policies that have been updated. And some of these include, for example, the COVID vaccination policy, if you don't already have one. And these are essentially Word documents, and I'll just show you these here in terms of what you have access to. So within it, let me just bring this up and click on this to open this up for you as well too. And here we go. And I'll just bring this up. Here we are. And you have access to the COVID safe vaccination policy that you can use. And we've updated this based on the states and territories where your agency is based at. So essentially, it is a range of exemptions, proof of vaccination, whether you should be asking personnel around this, who's covered within it, etc. And you've got this information at hand, which you have access to. So essentially, where you go is into the Gemba Docs, and you can simply click on the policies and procedures folder, and this will bring it up for you. So essentially, when we're talking about these areas and what is actually being required by agencies, what you're finding is that there are a range of specific action requirements from a legal compliance area that your agency needs to follow. Now, it is going to be excessive for us to run a full legal compliance session in one session only. So we have just started to look at what are some of the overarching guidance and advice that your agency should be following in terms of some broader context. And then over the next few weeks, we will be unpacking this specifically in each of these roles for your agency and updating this directly. These next few slides really cover some of the legal compliance areas that your agency should be aware of and also what to do. And this was based on some of the questions that agencies asked us since registering for the webinar. So essentially, we're looking to answer some of the commonly and most frequently asked questions. So first of all, what is a close contact, and what do you do if or can you screen people if they are coming into your agency? So essentially, managing COVID-19 in the workplaces is critically important to ensure that your services continue and staff are kept safe as well. So essentially, what we're seeing is as COVID becomes more prevalent in the community, people who have COVID-19 will visit businesses and workplaces. So essentially, what departments have tried to push obligations back onto all of you to essentially manage is to look at your own health response, encourage anyone with symptoms to get tested, isolate and test for COVID-19, and quarantine where possible and test close contacts of diagnosed COVID-19 cases. If you do operate your own business as well too, you should review your continuity plans and think about ways to mitigate risks, which we're going to show you today around. And I'm going to give you some really clear examples on some of the cases of what has worked for agencies. Now, in terms of preparing for COVID-19 in the workplace, essentially what departments have said is that it's essentially a good idea to prepare staff and clients to be COVID positive around this, and consider such safety measures. And this is taken from the departments, some of the departments' websites. We visited Victoria, Queensland, ACT, South Australia, Queensland as well too. And as part of this, what we've found is that the departments are pushing agencies to consider safety measures. And some of these that have just been published in the last few weeks has said, look at screening staff, contractors, clients, and other visitors to your workplace. But how do you actually screen clients, and what does that in fact look like? And I'll actually show you how this works and what you can also do. It also is, what they also ask is that you make sure that customers and contractors and other visitors check in using the relevant state app. Now, can I just point out here, which is actually really important, and we actually advised and spoke to the Victorian Department of Health around this going back when they were first issuing the check-in app, was specifically around the screening of clients. Now, the check-in apps essentially allow you to check in to a workplace, but what they're actually asking here is to screen people. But what does that actually mean? And this is what's caused agencies a lot of confusion, because the departments aren't actually saying, well, what is the screening measures? What do you need to look at in terms of screening clients? And how can you actually make that simple for people that may be elderly, that technology and mobile phones are foreign? Can you use paper to in fact do that? And how can you, what if someone does screen it and how do you actually get that information managed so that you know if someone is positive or the likes that may well come into your agency. So we're going to look at that as well too. But essentially, overarching rules from a work health and safety point of view and things that are coming out of the department actually ask you to focus on screening and also check-ins, and also looking at recording attendance of sites as well. Now, encourage vaccination in the workplace. And again, there are some mandatory vaccination rules, essentially covering different work groups. We've seen this in Queensland, for example, where there are vaccination mandates in place for some high-risk settings to protect staff and the community. If you're looking at other states, for example, like Victoria, there are public health directives that we will be covering off around mandatory vaccination rules as well too. We've also worked with a number of agencies in terms of changing service agreements and policy documents as well too. That allows you to ask clients and also ask staff, including volunteers, for their vaccination status as well. And you will find that in your template policies as well too, there are also as I mentioned, the vaccination policy documents that you can view and also download yourself as well. But we will be coming to that over the next few weeks. Now, one of the other questions that people ask is, what if a staff member is diagnosed with COVID? What do we actually do? Well, essentially, if you have a COVID confirmed case in your workplace, they must isolate for 7 days from the date they are tested positive. No other staff must quarantine unless they are considered a close contact. Close contact means a person who is a household member or a household contact of a diagnosed person, and we'll be sending out some definitions of what close contact actually is. It also means that if a staff member is diagnosed or informed if they have a positive test outside their home, they must travel directly to the premises they will be isolating at by a private transport, ambulance, or other or government transport. And a private transport means a private vehicle that a diagnosed person may drive themselves or be driven by a close contact. And so there are specific issues that your agency must consider as well. Now, as part of this, you do have an obligation within your agency, as I mentioned, from a work health and safety response. Now, this means that contact tracing, if requested by a public health officer, staff must provide information of the address that the staff member is isolating at, contact details, including telephone numbers, email address, and dates of birth, and also other relevant information. And this is fairly consistent across all state and territory agencies. Now, as part of this, there is the obligation for your agency to manage your workplace cleaning. Now, as soon as you become aware that someone with COVID-19 has attended your workplace, you should perform a clean. Now, agencies then turn around and say, well, what does this actually look like? Is this simply a routine clean with standard household cleaning products? Is this acceptable, or is a deep clean necessary? And this does vary. You will find that in Queensland, it does say that routine cleaning with standard household cleaning products is acceptable and deep clean is not necessary. But this does cause confusion now, because what agencies have said to us is, well, what is the difference between what happened literally only a few months ago with what we are being told now? It almost seems, and quite openly, it seems like a lot of state departments are kind of changing the rules because the workforce, because there's so much challenges in what we're actually seeing at the moment. So essentially what we are going to look at, and I will show you the work health and safety guidelines on this as well too, and where you can access these as well. So Brett's just asked a question. The current close contact household definition does not provide much protection for other staff members. Could there be additional obligations from a WHS perspective? That's a really great question, Brett. Britt, as well too. It is essentially what we're seeing is you're right that the household, that the close contact and household definition does not provide much protection. Essentially, for each agency, the responsibility here is around minimizing COVID-19 in the workplace. So how can you actually do that? And let me jump to this and actually show you what agencies are actually doing as well, which I think will answer your question. So we have a number of agencies that I will jump to around this, and I acknowledge the agencies in front of us, Brett, to answer your question. Rambolara Aboriginal Cooperative, and we thank Laurie Seville, the Chief Operating Officer out there, and also Women's Housing, Judy Lyon, the Chief Executive Officer, and also Lena Tompkinson and Lindy Parker, who looks after compliance and operations at Women's Housing. Rambolara is a fairly large Aboriginal community-controlled organisation running a diverse range of services. A bit of background, Women's Housing provides support services to women and men who are in a number of agents who are looking for services for this as well too. And also there was a number of other agencies, Rock Hosanna, Miller Baptist Church, Maureen Harmer, and Nick Skalinski at CYM. We're just going to show you some of the information of how they've actually used some of these forms to meet their legal compliance obligations. And this also includes the Southern Migrant and Refugee Centre, Patricia Matthews, the Manager of People and Culture. Now, let me just walk you through to answer Britt's question on this, which was around the details of how to actually complete one of these forms and what they need to look at. So essentially, what you have to answer your question is that there is what's called a daily attestation form. And essentially, staff go through, and just to show you the workflow of this, staff go through and complete this form. Now, what it is checking is, do they have any COVID symptoms? There are a series of questions, including the close contacts list. And essentially, when staff complete this, it will, if they answer no to all of the questions, that's fine. If they answer yes, it'll actually create an alert. And essentially what the Southern Migrant Resource Centre gets people to do, they have a lot of outreach workers that don't actually come into the office, but will actually run from their home directly to a client's site. And with it, essentially what they then see here is that if they answer yes to any of these questions, then an alert will go out to the person that is managing it, in this case, the Manager of People and Culture. And you can see that they've got some 18,000 forms that have been completed over the last few months. So what we are seeing when I bring this up, just to show you where this works, Brett, as well, essentially people can go in, they log in, and this form here is based on the Victorian Daily Attestation form. And when I click on this, essentially what you have is the name, the date, and the time that the person's completing the form, essentially whether they've been to any outbreak locations as well too, whether they've come into close contact, which is around this, for not just the household, but whether they've actually visited any of the sites. Now, if I click on this, this is the Victorian one, it'll actually come up with a list of checklist sites for other states as well. And essentially, if they ask any questions on whether they've got any of the COVID symptoms, it flags and actually says, look, you don't come into work, and your manager gets notified. So essentially what we're seeing from here is essentially a work form, and you can use this form. We know that other agencies like Bellarine Community Health in Victoria will also use a similar form to this, but they do it on different devices and also use it on a paper-based system as well too, to essentially record the information. What we do also see on this, to work backwards as well too, is that the Ukraine Youth Association, and I'm just going backwards on this as well too, to show you similar forms, that again, they've got what we call a COVID safe visitor form. Now they use the same, a similar form, but what they've got access to is to ask people when, and they were running actually a camp in December around this and over the holiday period in January. So as people were coming in, they actually got them to record their name, their telephone number, and essentially they bundled together. They bundled this together to say, well, rather than having the single form where you have to answer yes or no to half a dozen of the COVID symptoms, it was a yes or no to all of the questions. And essentially what this did was very quickly screen clients, in their case, community members that were coming in for their camp as well too. And essentially they were able to then monitor if anybody had any COVID symptoms. And this is especially where the Commonwealth and state departments are asking agencies to screen clients. It's more than just doing the check-in. It's essentially looking at, well, how can we actually get this information and how do I get the alerts around this? So Leisha has just asked a question, what security does this program have? Very aware of health information, having a very strict criteria around storing information. Thank you, Leisha, around this. Look, we're essentially, this program meets all of the Department of Health's security obligations. It is actually used as part of the clinical risk reporting in a number of states for the department's own clinical risk reporting, where it can link for those health and hospital services that are actually funded directly by the Department of Health to report risks. And the department meets all its requirements as part of the security obligations as well too. All of the information that is placed on here is owned by your agency as well. And essentially any time that you need to access it, it is provided by a direct login for each of the users as well. So essentially every time someone logs in, a footprint is left behind. I will be quite clear on this, that this system has been in place for, over 15 years now. And as part of that, the departments of health, we do connect with the clinical risk systems as well too, and it has been audited and approved by various departments of health as well. All the information that you use around this, or that your clients or personnel place on here, Leisha, is owned by your agency as well. So if you say, if you want to pull this information off in a number of months' time, you can do that as well. So it certainly meets all of the requirements as well. I will add, just because there has also been a question on this, that when you do visit our website, and you can go to kaizensynergy.com and bring this up, you will also find that we do have a ICT white paper on here that covers off all of the specific. So just going to kaizensynergy.com. When you do click on this, you can also look at our ICT white paper, which covers off all of our security measures and infrastructure requirements as well too. So that gives you certainty around what we are talking about here as well too. David has just asked, how frequently do public health and officials actually check that agencies are following the rules? It's a good question, David, around this. We have heard of agencies where WorkSafe has been going out and conducting random spot audits as well too. And in saying that, part of this is not so much from what agencies and officials are actually asking for around this, but it's also around trying to help your agency stay open during this time as well. So with it, we've tried to make this as simple and easy as possible for agencies of all sizes. You will also find, for example, like the Ukraine Youth Association, that they use this form specifically for their camps as well. We also have seen, if we go back one slide as well too, and there is the Rock Hosanna Church as well too, and picking up Samara has just asked a question saying, we are a tiny agency of 4 in the room at any given time and would like to have multiple forms and would like to not have multiple forms to check against any short and easy tips. Yeah, absolutely, Shamara. We've had agencies like yourselves, like the Rock Hosanna group as well, that quite simply have, and they've got pastoral team members and the likes, that they've got basically a form as simple as this. And you'll find it on your Gemba dashboard that you can use. So with it, what you find is that by simply completing the form, you've got a register of essentially something quick that you can use. And you've then got a register to say that you've met all of your, I'll say, your legal compliance obligations. If things change, and picking up David's comments as well too, if you're verifying things like the screening for different COVID symptoms, these forms can then be updated as well too. And with it, it means then that you're able to very quickly, part of this is being able to monitor what you're actually looking at and how you're actually controlling your agency's requirements, but also at the end of the day, making sure that if there is a case of COVID within your workplace, and this is picking up David's comment as well, that you can actually show somehow from a work cover even point of view, whether that staff member actually unfortunately got COVID outside the workplace, or was that inside your workplace itself as well too. So there are a number of work health and safety obligations to look at here. Claire has just asked, and by all means, please keep the questions coming through, because we will be looking at some of these case studies and unpacking these as we go through today's session as well. So Claire has just asked, I work for an animal rescue organisation that has 8 paid staff and about 150 volunteers. Currently, vaccinations are not mandated for our industry, but where do we stand with volunteers legally? Can we and should we be mandating vaccinations anyway for our staff? Sorry, let me just bring this up. Currently, our vaccinations are not mandated for our industry, but where do we stand with volunteers legally? Can we and should we be mandating vaccinations anyway for our personnel? That's a really good question, Claire, around that. And what we have suggested for agencies, and by all means, jump into your, let me bring this up, the resources that we're going to send through. You can have a look at the policies, and we have the COVID safe vaccination policy for you as well. With this, we do look at it broadly from a work health and safety response, Claire. What we have seen for agencies is to look at what measures can you or should you put in place. I mean that from can you or should you put in place to ensure that your personnel staff are kept safe. It also means that if you do, and I'll just unpack this for agencies around this, because if you do mandate your vaccinations, what we do ask agencies to look at is look at the reasoning behind this. And you'll find that within our template document, what we have looked at is, let me just bring up the headings for you. This is a policy document of what are the vaccination requirements? Is there a cost to personnel around this, or are you going to cover it? What is the vaccination information? Are there exemptions that you may apply to that, Claire, as well too? What are the vaccination records? So are you going to request that people provide you with confirmation of the vaccination? We know in some states that there are some essential services that are being reviewed, are being required to hold on to that information. and also what is the compliance review that you're going to have in place around this. So already they are talking of booster shots as well too, and are you going to ask them to continue to have that those booster shots as those get rolled out as well? We have seen this in terms of getting this information out and going back, and I'll just go back, you can see my numbers are going down, to women's housing. And women's housing also do have, there are women's refuge and support service as well. And essentially they've got a lot of the resources. They've been using Gemba for a number of years now. Of importance here is that Lena Tompkinson has also updated their policy documents as well onto the website as well. So this way, where you're getting your information from, and this is where Claire is, I think, picking it up, around how do you actually get that information out to your personnel around this. Legally, we have been suggesting to agencies to mandate their vaccinations, particularly where some of the volunteers fall into some of the vulnerable population groups, and we are going to be covering that in the next few weeks as well too. Equally, it also then means that how do you actually keep your services open, and what are the exemptions that you may apply to those agencies. David has just asked, insurers will not insure against any COVID situation, including adverse reactions to the vaccination. This includes no insurance protection for individuals, board members. Are there any legal protection given the lack of insurance? David, could you just expand on that question for us, and happy to come back to you. Is this insurance for agencies or in terms of the vaccination mandates if there was an adverse reaction to it? I think that's what you're asking, but if you could just clarify whether it's about the adverse reactions to the vaccine after you have a mandatory policy for your agency. If you could let me know, that would be great, and we can come back to you on that. The other one that I will mention around this is when you look at who is involved and who is responsible for this, there are a number of forms that we're looking at here around, and I mentioned about workplace cleaning and also work health and safety obligations. So essentially where agencies have done this very well is actually spread the workload across different agents, different personnel. And essentially there may well be things like the working from home form, registers, cleaning registers that you need to look at. Each one of these items we will be unpacking over the next few weeks, but essentially starting from the top here is that agencies where they've had their forms, and all of these forms are open for you to access, is around things like, starting from the top, the daily assessment form. This allows you to essentially monitor your personnel and clients to make sure that they're COVID symptom free. I'm going to say as much as reasonably possible. If people are working from home, then again, Safe Work have issued checklists around what are some of the criteria in terms of ensuring that people are not only working from safe, but you've also got your ergonomic checks and balances that are being done. And also the cleaning registers of when your cleaners are coming through and what are the specific requirements that they need to meet as part of that. Now, what we have seen, and this has worked incredibly well for agencies like Rambolara Aboriginal Cooperative, and I do thank Laurie Seville out there as well. Rambolara is based in Shepparton. They have 300 odd personnel working from multiple sites. They've had their COVID safe plans in place, as well as emergency management plan. One of the big things that they have had is staff actually complete the daily assessment form in the past. And this has included where they're up to about 48,000, to give you an idea, forms that people have lodged over the last number of years. And as part of that, those daily assessments has allowed staff to essentially very quickly monitor for any symptoms that they've had, and they've also then in place stay-at-home orders. What they've also had was the working from home approval registers. And again, the working from home approval registers was to almost run things like the work work plans and what staff are actually doing, and gives them a single source of truth around information that they need to have. The other areas that they've also had in place was around staff training. And this is the information, if you remember, I showed you in my previous slides, where the Commonwealth actually asked for specific training or specific items that you needed to provide to your agency staff. And if I go back to the slide, it did talk about educating and training your staff. Now, what Rambolara have also done for them is to open up things like their ongoing training for COVID safe screenings. And some of these trainings, which I will add, has also been approved by the Australian College of Rural and Remote Medicine. And it's simple things like how to put on a mask around this as well, and how to also keep their workplace safe. And there are a number of different modules that is also being shared with agencies across this in order to be able to access this as well. Lee has just asked, do we need to constantly check our staff and consultants with RAT tests prior to entering a workplace in our name? With it, Lee, what we have seen with agencies is that it's a screening process, and this is where the confusion has actually come in with a number of state health departments. So what people have done in the past and still are continuing to do is to essentially use the COVID assessment form. Now, where we've actually pulled this form from, to give you an idea, is that some of the state health departments, for example, in Victoria, have actually asked people to provide a COVID daily attestation form. So it's basically a statutory declaration around, do you have any COVID symptoms for some agencies? And that's what we've actually based this form on. So essentially what you're screening for is whether people have either been to any outbreak locations or whether they've got any symptoms. And what we're finding is that essentially agencies like even Women's Housing have done this as well too. Rambolara have done this consistently, and they're located, as I mentioned, in Shepparton in Victoria, where because they're fairly close to the New South Wales border as well too, they have a lot of transient travellers and transport coming through the area. So essentially they have been locked down a number of times over the past number of years. The importance around this is that for screening people around this, you need to have a consistent approach. The problem, obviously the problems with RAT tests at the moment is that the ability to actually get them. So what we're finding with agencies, and this is not only Rambolara and also Women's Housing, but also another agency which we advised, Merrimack, which is a housing provider in South Australia, essentially having a process that everyone can follow fairly easily, and something that will allow you economically to also manage this as well too moving forwards. We've found that all of the agencies that I'm showing you today has actually used a screening form rather than RAT tests around this. And they've done this across the board for a number of agencies. So we've seen Rambolara do this. We've seen Women's Housing do this as well too. We've seen the Rock Hosanna Group do this, the Ukraine Youth Association, and also Southern Migrant Resource Centre doing this as well too. David has just come back asking, the insurer will not insure against any COVID scenarios. So I said, if we mandate a COVID vaccination policy and someone has an adverse event and takes legal action, are we covered? Answer was no. The work health and safety requirement to make the vaccination mandatory was unsafe for that person, and workers' compensation legal action will not be covered. This is a separate insurance. They are underwriting, so no workers' compensation insurance. David, so essentially what you're questioning is around if someone has the scenario is that you mandate a COVID vaccination policy within your agency, and if somebody has a adverse reaction to it, will the agency be held accountable to it? So essentially, how we've structured the vaccination policy around this is that while your agency can have a mandatory vaccination policy, it still comes back to when the person also goes to get the vaccine, essentially the practitioners that they are seeing will screen them as well too. This is not unusual, whether it's been done at a pharmacy, a GP clinic, or some other vaccination hub as well too, and also monitor any symptoms afterwards that they may have as well. So essentially, as part of this, David, which I will add, is the flip side of this, that if you don't have some sort of vaccination position around this, then essentially the not having your appropriate work health and safety measures, and what work health and safety would say is, have you taken reasonable steps to minimize COVID within your workplace as well too? So essentially there are a number of ways that you can manage this. You will find, and I will add, that what we do have is a number of policies that we will be unpacking over the next few weeks for you as well too. So there are things like board reporting policies, privacy and confidentiality policies, social gathering policies. We've got work health and safety policies as well too. So these are the 6 most common policy documents that agencies are using all across the country at the moment. There are template policies that you can use as well too and apply directly to your agency. And it will ask you a series of questions around this. So some of this, David, will also be for, if I look at the board reporting policy, and I'll just click on this to bring this up. For example, what are the key reporting requirements that your board needs to consider as part of its reporting obligations and monthly meetings in terms of managing COVID? So what are the key obligations that the board information must or should be having in terms of their own individual management of COVID within your agency? Rachel has just come back in terms of this for asking, can workplaces expect employees to conduct RAT tests prior to work each day in their own time, or come into work 15 minutes prior? Should this be in work time? Rachel, this really depends on where and the size of your agency as well too. I know that some community health services have asked people to conduct screening on their way into work as part of their check-in basis. In terms of agreements and awards that are in place, there are some agencies that you may need to consider current and existing contracts that you also have in place as well too. Depending on where you're sitting with these tests as well too, there is some variation, but next week we are covering off the Fair Work obligations in terms of your personnel and also RAT checks as well too. Janine has just asked, does the Australian government COVID vaccine claim scheme remove company risk, people that can be reimbursed for adverse risk effects by the government? That is something that I'll have to take offline around this, Janine, and come back to agencies on this. It is something that in terms of adverse reactions and the likes, that we have seen policy positions of agencies essentially where there are adverse reactions for some clients that further case-by-case basis need to be considered. So with it, I will just add, just to finish off, and I will open up the phone lines shortly around this, that you will get access to your resources today. Lee, you've just asked what is the charge around Gemba to use. We are opening this up as a single seat. It is license free for agency staff to actually jump in as a single seat around this. If you do open this up to your other staff, then depending on the number of people that work within your agency, it will change as well too, but we will be putting some further information up around this as well too. But it can be as little as $100 a month for agencies and is on a month-to-month arrangement. In terms of our recommendations, essentially we are suggesting that you look at plans, policies, support letters for staff from your company to inform them about news bites around changes in rules and obligations that you're across this. There are policies that we have outlined that align to your policy and disaster activities, industry plans as well too, and also jumping in and looking at the dashboard. Fleur has just asked, will these core documents be emailed to all participants today? Absolutely, Fleur, that's what we're planning on doing and getting these set up as well too for you. So that way you will get access to the dashboard today around this, and we will be circulating out these resources along with these slides as well. We will open up the phone lines for any questions that you might have. If you are listening to this and watching this recording after today's live session, then by all means, please contact us on 1300 360 360 or email us directly at support@gemba360.com. You can get access to the dashboard and the likes by reaching out on these contact phone numbers or by email, or if you do have any other legal questions. We have just